Leon, my friend, we are live. Do you feel it? Do you feel the electricity? Do you feel the energy as we open the virtual doors to our discussion about the state of the urban art market here?
Indeed, indeed.
Well, it's good to see you, my friend. I'm very excited to have a discussion. You and I must say, as folks begin to file in, you and I actually were doing these before. I think you were the first person with whom I did a discussion over Zoom
Hmm.
several months ago, and it's always a real pleasure to get to do it with you as we discuss one of my favorite categories here at Heritage Auctions.
Agreed. Thank you for having me. I like doing this.
Well, this is exciting. I mean, look, the fact is, we're going to talk about kind of a lot of stuff here. We're going to talk about the state of the market. We're going to talk about an upcoming sale, which takes place on Thursday at 1 o'clock Central Time. But for the folks who are here, and I'm Robert Wolonsky, the Communications Director here at Heritage Auctions, and I am joined by Leon Ben Ramon, who is our Vice President of Modern and Contemporary Art here at Heritage Auctions. And we're going to take your questions. Well, I'm not going to take your questions. I'll read them to Leon because there's not much that I could say about this particular subject. Leon, after all, is the expert. That's why he's here. But if you have a question for Leon, feel free to drop it in the Q&A discussion, and we'll get to it. And it can be about anything. It can be about something that's in an auction that's upcoming. It can be about something we've sold. It can be about something that you might have that you're interested in maybe consigning to Leon. He's here for the next 45 minutes or an hour to answer your questions and to give you an insight into the state of the market, which has been pretty interesting, right, Leon? I mean,
Yep.
I've done a lot of these over the last few months talking about the year that was, and I'm curious what one of your biggest or what your biggest takeaways from the last year has been.
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is, obviously with COVID and the pandemic, a year ago, almost to the day, had you asked me, how will the pandemic affect the art market, the urban art market? I think there was a lot of doom and gloom talk and a lot of expectations of the market going down, and certainly certain parts of the marketplace, certain sectors saw a decrease in business. But the overwhelming surprise has been the fact that the market has gone up, and especially in the categories where we have a significant market share. I'd say urban art, prints and multiples, and modern and contemporary art. Those areas have just grown so significantly, especially in the sub $500,000 range. Things $5,000 and up, under half a million, I'd say, have really grown, and that's been a huge surprise. I think it speaks to the fact that a lot of our collectors were home, didn't travel, didn't go to restaurants, were maybe looking around the house, thinking about things that they want to replace, things they want to buy, things they want to sell. And so we've just seen an overwhelming amount of activity. Even the first 2 months of this year are probably nearly close to the same amount of volume and value that we did in the first half of last year. So just to kind of give an indicator as to how robust the market's been in the last few months.
Are there any artists or any particular genres as we discuss this, whether it's sculpture, whether it's
Hmm.
certainly many of the folks that we're going to discuss began their careers in the world of graffiti art. I'm just sort of curious, has it been pop culture pieces? Has it been, and we'll discuss many of this over the course of the next little while. But I'm just sort of curious: is there any one particular thing that has surprised you the most over the last year?
Sure. Well, I'd say, especially for the urban art sector, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the kind of crazy rise in prices for Banksy. It's fairly specific. Banksy has always been a very important artist in the urban art market. Has always been, kind of a staple of most of the auctions. But we really just saw an incredible rise in value, and I don't mean 10 or 20%, which is what we might see for another artist who's kind of getting hot on a good time period. Might be a small rise like that. I mean, I'm talking about 8x, 10x of what that previous values were. To give you an example, Golf Sale, which is a print that we used to sell with an estimate of 4,000 to 6,000 for maybe something between $6,000 and $8,000, maybe 10 or 12 on a really good day. Is selling for $50,000, $60,000. So literally a multiple of what it used to sell for. And what's been most surprising is that incredible rise in value, happened during the pandemic, but B, really there wasn't like a single shift that created that. I mean, I do think on the back end, a lot of us in the business are aware of a few major key players who came in, and obviously some of the bigger prices like the Monkey Parliament and the Monet, kind of reinvigorated the marketplace or brought a lot of people into the marketplace. But seeing this level of growth across the board. So for almost all the Banksy images that we've sold, we've seen huge numbers. And for me, the even more exciting thing has been that we've literally broken records from just a few months prior. So to give you an example, in October, Pulp Fiction, which is kind of one of my favorite images, and I think you and I, Robert, had actually looked at that last time we did this. The really famous image of John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson holding bananas instead of guns. That image had previously made a world record in October for, I think it was $75,000 or $80,000. That was a world record price for the work. And then we sold it just a month later for $150,000. So we literally doubled a record that had just been broken itself. And so, the rise in value has really been significant for the Banksy market. And, as a result of that, we can talk about these a little bit later, but we've really introduced these in-focus auctions on a fairly regular basis. So what that is for us is taking a certain segment, certain artist in the marketplace, and giving both collectors and consigners the opportunity to zero in and focus in on that market. And so the reason that we started the year out with Banksy, he was our first in-focus sale of the year. We did a highly curated auction, only 9 works in the auction. That was incredibly successful. We set 3 world record prices, and we set 3 second highest ever price. So, really across the board, just a fantastic auction. And the reason we decided to do that with Banksy was because we did feel like, that was a marketplace that needed that kind of focus at the moment.
So we're taking questions, obviously, and there are already 2. And I'll get to the first one because Lindsay asks a question very much related to the subject at hand, which is, when will the Banksy bubble burst? Is it comparable to Warhol's bubble, or is it in fact sustainable in the long haul?
I certainly think that there's a possibility for the bubble to burst, just because really the number of different print editions that Banksy has, the varied nature of those editions. So the fact that some are signed, some are not signed, and then other kind of little caveats like things like having a pest control certificate or not, which I should mention that everything that Heritage sells always comes with a pest control certificate, if it's eligible to get one. There are some objects that we sell that are not eligible to get pest control certificates, and so they do not come accompanied by those. But aside from that, everything we sell does have a pest control certificate. So those are kind of some of the factors and the variables that go into that marketplace. I do think that we're already seeing I wouldn't call it a dip, but I'd say a small plateau. I do think that there's still a lot more runway available for Banksy, but I think in the next 6 months to a year, we'll start to see really a shift to the better quality works. I can't imagine that some of the lower value, less interesting prints will continue to make the prices that they've been making. But I think the really sought after images like the girl with balloon or the Nola, I think those prices, Jack and Jill, I think those prices will actually continue to go up. And I should mention that in our April Prints and Multiple sale, we have a really exciting selection of 5 Banksy prints, including the Nola and the Jack and Jill, which are, I think, 2 of the best Banksy images out there. But
it really is by piece, not necessarily just by artist, right? I mean, certainly the best pieces by the best or the best known or the most coveted artist are the ones that are going to continue to sell for the prices that you've seen, correct?
Sure. Well, back to the question, actually, which rightfully so mentioned Warhol. In 2006, 2007, 2008, you were seeing all Warhol works go up in value. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Everything went up in value because there was such a huge, kind of bubble in his market. What happened after that bubble burst is there was a flight to quality. And so I expect that we'll see the same thing with Banksy, where maybe some of the prices that are happening right now for things like Golf Sale, which I mean, I have nothing against it. I think it's a great image, but it's also just a very standard print. It's nothing incredibly, kind of special in relation to that. I do think that we should see a correction in those prices. So I will say that it is by image and not necessarily by artist, because I think there's a universal agreement that Banksy is an incredibly important artist. He is certainly an artist of our time, making very contemporary and very relevant, current commentary. Actually, the last work that he just did on the prison wall is, if anyone hasn't seen it on Instagram, it's an absolute masterpiece and something very much worthwhile seeing on Instagram. And I just think that there's no doubt that he'll continue to remain important. When the dust settles in 20 or 30 years from now.
So to that point, and there are many questions that are coming in, Leon, and I know we're going to get to looking at some pieces that have sold and that are coming. But while folks have you here, they certainly have questions for you. And to the Banksy, certainly Banksy grabs a lot of people's interest.
Sure.
David asks, are you surprised to see Banksy prints surpass Haring and Warhol prints? Are Haring and Warhol simply undervalued, or is Banksy perhaps too high? Or is it the fact that Banksy is just, the market is now bigger than previous pop genre leaders to begin with?
Well, there's always this question, right? And this happened, for example, when Basquiat sold for $110 million, a few years back. People said, I can't believe a Basquiat is worth the same value as a Monet, because a Monet had sold right around the same time at right around the same value level. So there's always that question. I will say more directly that, I do think the print prices for Banksy, as much as they have risen, that is a relatively new phenomenon. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other one is we still haven't seen the kind of volume that we see in the Warhol print market, for example. So, Warhol print prices can range anywhere between, I'd say, $15,000 on the lowest end, but the most sought after Warhol prints can sell in the millions. I mean, unique images that Warhol pulled, have sold for, several $1 million. So don't think Banksy has hit that level just yet. But could I imagine that rise in value continuing, and for Warhol and Banksy prices to get to nearly the same level? Absolutely, because I think as opposed to Warhol, where you really can't acquire his best images anymore because they've been sold and they've been in the marketplace and they're long gone, you can still acquire some of the best Banksy images. And I think, for example, I know that Girl with Balloon, that print has traded hands quite a few times, and it's selling around the $500,000 mark, which is a lot of money for a singular print. However, that is obviously probably Banksy's best known image. And the fact that you can still buy that print is actually pretty remarkable, because you wouldn't nearly be able to, buy, I'd say, a similar print for Warhol or Haring at that same price value level. I mean, the Warhol, if you wanted to buy the set of 10 Maryland prints, which is probably almost the equivalent work, I mean, you need to spend in the millions in order to get that.
Last Banksy question, because folks have a lot of questions that are not about Banksy, and we'll get to some of those artists here in just a moment. Bill asks about a specific print, which is Applause, and we were talking a moment about rare prints and signed prints and unsigned prints and so forth. There are certainly some Banksy prints like Applause that don't come up very often, and I assume those are the ones that are going to increase in value. And Bill asks specifically, why do some of these prints like Applause not come up very often?
Well, it's funny, actually. Applause does not come up very often, but I will say that we have actually sold Applause, I think, 3 times in the last 6 months. So funny enough, we've had a lot of success in selling that image. I think that's always a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you sell the first one. I think the estimate on the first one we sold, which was 6 months ago, more or less, the estimate I think was 8,000 to 12,000, and I think it sold for some crazy number, like maybe $70,000 or $80,000. I mean, I'm sure we could look it up shortly. But that image specifically, I do think is a fantastic image. It is an interesting one because it comes in an signed edition and an unsigned edition. And so it's important to pay attention to the differences, obviously, between the signed and the unsigned. The value level is going to be much different, and also the edition size is going to be much different. So I do think that those rare images will come up less and less frequently. But right now, because of this huge rise in value, people who bought that applause for 500 pounds or 1,000 pounds are now looking at, 60, 70, $80,000 and saying, okay, I'm pretty sure I did okay with this print. Now is my time to sell. And so a lot of people will be letting go of those prints now, and in the coming, I'd say, 6 months to a year. But eventually what will happen is the people who paid $80,000 or $70,000 for that print, and bought it after the huge rise in value, they won't be as quick to let those things go. And so, we'll have to wait till that segment of the market kind of catches up to those images.
So we're going to start taking a look here at the upcoming Urban Art Auction, which is on Thursday at 1 p.m. Central Time. Obviously, bidding is open now. I don't think there's a Banksy in this one, correct?
No, and that's quite intentional. I know we've just spent 15 minutes talking about Banksy, but the reason being that we did have that in focus auction in January, and I am happy to announce that I believe we'll be having another in focus Banksy auction in September. And so we're kind of storing everything away. But for those who are interested, as I did mention earlier, we do have 5 fantastic, amazing Banksy prints coming up in our April sale. So that's definitely a place to look. And that's our April Prints and Multiples live auction. So that's not an urban art sale, but we are going to be selling the Banksy prints there. Kind of a more high profile venue, a little bit more marketing. And we felt would be a great place to be able to offer those works.
Because Dave and Robert in our Q&A here are asking about what other artists outside of Banksy are hot right now, and what outside of Banksy, what other urban art do you see on the rise? Is there subject matter that stands out? Protests, counterculture, etc. And the fact is, that's kind of what we're here to discuss, actually.
Exactly. Well, I'd say you've got a pretty good smattering of names right there. I'd certainly say Barry Mcgee is having a huge moment right now. You can see his work on the bottom right there. Jerkface, who you can see on the top right, and even again on that second row, because it's a very active work in the sale. That artist is also having a very big moment. Vils, which is the second work, is also, his market has been going crazy. And then Edgar Plans, which you also just passed over there.
Right. We're going to discuss it. We'll actually here. Let's while we're looking at it, let's just go to Edgar Plans right here.
Sure. So Edgar Plans a kind of newer artist. I think an artist that a lot of people have been tracking and watching for a while, and have really had a pretty big expectation that he's going to have a rise in value, and it's finally kind of happening. So this is actually a really nice size work. It's, I believe, about 22 by 30, or excuse me, rather 20 by 28. So this is kind of a very typical, very familiar character. Being from 2018, it's not a necessarily new work. So we're really excited to be able to offer his works up at auction. Definitely an artist that I think, probably 6 months ago or a year ago, not many people were familiar with, but this kind of artist, superhero character. You can see the I Love Art pin there with his little holster of paintbrushes and paint in his hand. A really just kind of interesting character, and I think a visual character base that he's really developed over the last few years. So a lot of his paintings are now selling in the 6 figures. We certainly expect this to do quite well. I believe the bidding here is already at $87.50. Our expectation is that it will definitely break the $10, $15, hopefully $20,000 barriers, given the recent success in his marketplace.
Oh, I know you also wanted to talk about the Barry Mcgee here as well.
Well, Barry Mcgee, many people are familiar with. He originally went by Twist in the 1970s and 80s. He was a street artist, graffiti artist, and has really transitioned into the fine art world. I think for many of those who are familiar with Barry Mcgee and just familiar with the urban arts sector, he is an incredibly important artist. He has really influenced and played a major role in the visual language that a lot of other urban artists and street artists are using now. So he's really, a lot of artists have paid homage to him. He's really been influential to them. And I think there's just a huge number of people who have been waiting for his market to kind of take off. He's been shown in galleries, and I think it's just taken a while for people to kind of see it. And now, I think Barry Mcgee has kind of finally hit a nice stride. Many of his prices, especially for his abstract works and his kind of assemblage works, which are combinations of figurative works and abstract works, along with three-dimensional aspects usually. Those works are finally hitting some really nice prices. And so this is actually a huge a screw, which is another kind of very theme that he's explored over and over again. Definitely an image that was spray painted and seen throughout many cities. This is actually on shaped wood. So this makes it a very interesting medium, and it's also huge. It's quite large. It's 36 by 65 and a half inches. So it is a very large work. So we have this, and we also have a small portrait in the sale, and we're expecting that both of those will do quite well. There's the portrait, and that's on metal. So that's also kind of an interesting medium. I always appreciate when artists do things outside of the stereotypical canvas. So between these two works, we're really excited to be offering two Barry Mcgee works. Their bidding numbers are on the very low side right now, but we're expecting both of them to really shoot up. I think a lot of the Barry Mcgee collectors out there are holding their cards close to their chest. So should be very interesting to see where these works end up.
Leon, I'm fascinated by when an artist becomes hot. What leads that to happen? Certainly you have extensive experience in this. Barry Mcgee has been around for a long time. As you say, Barry Mcgee was initially known as Twist. This work here is very emblematic of the works that were painted on the sides of buildings and trains 10, 15, 20 years ago. I sort of wonder, at what point do people begin to realize, and what point do you begin to notice that people have taken notice of an artist whose work you believe should be valued and appreciated more than it is at the moment?
I mean, that's a great question. I think sometimes it can be very happenstantial. I think other times it's a gallery show, a museum show, a collaboration. For example, Kenny Scharf is another artist that's been in the urban art scene for a very long time that people have had an expectation of. He was very big in the East Village kind of crew in New York City, and has been in shows in some of the top galleries in New York for the last 30 to 40 years. I think people have just kind of been waiting for him to percolate, and then he did collaboration with Dior a few months ago, and I think that really bumped things up quite a bit and created a larger sense of urgency to get to purchase his work. That, along with the big show he had here at Jeffrey Deitch in Los Angeles. So sometimes a confluence of things like a collaboration and a big gallery show. But I do really think that for Barry Mcgee specifically, I think it is that influence on the younger generation of artists who have actually already had success themselves has been a very important factor. I do think that because a lot of people are realizing, I love, whether it be, Cause or, any other number of artists who started out as street artists, and then realizing actually how much Barry Mcgee influenced them in their work, saying, why aren't I collecting Barry Mcgee if he was actually the predecessor? And I think so that's just kind of a general sentiment amongst the collector base that's creating that.
One thing we tell people here, and certainly over the last year, I've gotten very used to saying, buy what you love. And I do sort of wonder, it's interesting, does someone buy, in your experience, is it often, do people buy what they love, or do they buy who they believe they need to own because so-and-so influenced such and such, or do they buy what they because they think it's a good investment now? How do you advise folks over the course of this market, and certainly what it's done in the last year, in terms of how should they go about acquiring what's in their collection?
Well, I agree with you entirely that everyone should buy what they love. Now, after you're buying what you love, there are kind of, I'd say bullet points, or checklist items you can go off of, right? So you can still be buying something that you love, but you can buying something very consciously. You can be, paying attention to fair market value. You can be paying attention to future value. Obviously, I think people should buy with the expectation that it's possible the work will go up in value and it's possible it will go down in value. That's always something important, and I think that's why the buy what you love is always got to be the first thing, because if you do love it and you hang it on your wall and you enjoy it every day, then that's going to be the best return on investment, in my opinion. But of course, in my mind, I always tell my collectors to look at a few different variables, and that might be firstly looking at, is this an A-level work, a B-level work, or a C-level work by that artist? Is this the best of what they've put out, or is it really not, is it something that was maybe rushed out of the studio, or something that, is not their best work? So there's that aspect. The other one is looking at mediums. So are you buying something that's unique, something that's a small edition? Like, for example, usually sculptures can end up being smaller edition sizes. Or are you buying something that's a larger edition, like a bigger print run? Yeah, I think that's actually a perfect transition to the Hebrew Brantley there. So,
well, this is for me. This kind of hits all my buttons. I've told you a million times. Hebrew Brantley from Chicago is one of my favorite artists. And this, if I could buy what I love, I would buy one of the sculptures from the watch from 2013, the exhibition that was that traveled throughout Chicago, that was done for Chicago Arts Week. In fact, here's one, the Green Fly Girl that sold in November for 37,500, and here's one of the Blue Fly Boys from that same exhibition that is in this auction. It's currently at 14,500.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think Hebrew Brantley is an artist that's getting a lot of attention, has had a huge rise in value. Again, one of those artists that I think a lot of us in the community were kind of waiting to see happen. I initially got introduced to Hebrew Brantley's work through ComplexCon. Saw that he had a booth there, had been able to have a couple conversations, and really seeing, oh, this is someone who is going to take off. 2 or 3 years ago, we were really happy because we sold a canvas painting of his for $14,000 and set a world record at the time. So I'm happy to say we've been involved with Hebrew Brantley's market probably earlier than anyone else in the secondary market. We were selling prints of his 2 or 3 years ago. He's had a huge rise in value. Prints are going for $2,000-$3,000 now, things that we're selling for a couple hundred. As you mentioned, the last sculpture from the watch that we sold went for $37,500. I think since that was a record at the time. I think since then that record has since been broken, and I expect that we'll break another record, hopefully with the Flyboy that we're offering now. Again, a lot of collectors probably keeping the cards close to their chest. It's only at 14,500. I think there's a much bigger runway available. There isn't like a 2-week period that goes by that I don't hear about another important collector acquiring Hebrew's works. I know George Lucas just, acquired, I think, 5 works. And so that was, kind of a big stamp of approval. But I think, Hebrew is just really tapping into, and has been tapping into, even, prior to the, unfortunate events of, George Floyd. He had been tapping into a lot of the ideas and a lot of the kind of themes that we're seeing now, and things that people are really discussing about, discussing in terms of Black Lives Matter. I think, Hebrew had been tapping into a lot of those questions, especially with these homage to Tuskegee airmen and women over here. He had been tapping into those questions and those ideas for a much longer time, for years now. And so I think his having a moment right now is certainly well deserved, and we're really excited to be able to offer the Flyboy.
And if someone would like to buy it for me, I would not say no. So another artist who's obviously done incredibly well here is Retna. World record in November for this particular piece. They Can't Come from 2015, which sold for 175,000. I know we have this piece here that's very unlike any other Retina piece, which is acrylic, I believe, acrylic on aluminum. It's a very reflective piece. I'm just curious, to what do you credit the success of Retina in the last few years?
Yeah, well, Retina is a very interesting artist. I think Retina has had a lot of success up front in both the gallery world and through his street works. I think a lot of people became familiar with Retina through his street works. But he also was being sold in galleries for as long as I had heard of him. And so, he's been one of those artists who's been able to have both of those kind of factors early on. I think Retina in some ways also can kind of typify one of the, kind of bohemian kind of unpredictable artists, both in terms of his personality, but also in terms of his work. So this is a very interesting work. As you mentioned, it's on aluminum, also quite large at 92.5 by 44 inches. So a really, big work. And I believe that's each panel. So each panel is 92.5 by 44. So, combines to actually be, almost double that at 88 inches. So, this is a very kind of typical work in the sense that, the hieroglyphs, I think an atypical work because it's on aluminum. And so you can even see that the acrylic paint there responds differently with the dripping, which I find to be very interesting. Has all of Retina's signature hieroglyphs there. But if you compare it to the work that we sold, for a world record last season, it was actually our fourth time breaking our own world record. So we've now had 4 world records for Retina. That being a kind of more traditional Retina work, being on canvas and featuring some of the kind of more familiar hieroglyphs that Retina uses on a regular basis. But this work that we're going to be offering on Thursday, really excited about. Again, I think the fact that it's a different medium makes it much more unique and much more interesting than a lot of the other works we've offered by him in the past.
So we've talked about Retina, we've talked about traditional, we've talked about non-traditional.
Mm-hmm.
There are 2 questions here that address the same subject when we talk about completely, wildly non-traditional. So Leon, here's the part of the discussion where I ask you about the non-fungible token market, the NFTs. I'm sure that, and look, I will say this, I've had experience with it in as much as that in our sports department, Heritage was the first to ever auction off NBA Top Shots, which is those
Mm-hmm.
digital moments.
Mm-hmm.
The video that one owns, its blockchain technology, the non-fungible tokens, and so forth. Mm-hmm. So certainly Heritage has already in other categories gotten into the NFT market. Do you see that happening at Heritage in the art world?
Well, it's funny you bring it up because I think about a month ago, nobody in the art world was talking about NFTs, and I think it's been 3 or 4 weeks now that it's just been the only thing I can hear about. It's funny because I do feel like at Heritage we pride ourselves at being at the forefront. We pride ourselves at selling things before anyone else. I mean, we were the first auction house to sell sneakers. We were the first auction house to sell Supreme. We were doing a lot of these things far before anyone else. And I think NFTs are similarly right up our alley in terms of, being at the forefront of something new and interesting. I will say that our auction schedule has kept us so busy that I think we haven't really had an opportunity to look outside of our usual course of business. I'd say that at the moment we are definitely paying very close attention to NFTs. We're watching the market very closely, but by the same token, we're watching cautiously. I think there's no doubt that NFTs will continue to remain and will be an important part of the marketplace. But I do think that right now it's a bit of the wild, wild west, and there are a lot of different players involved. There are a lot of different artists. I think there are a lot of different applications. And the question is just where things are going to head when the dust settles and the market stabilizes a little bit. So as opposed to those other marketplaces that I mentioned, like Supreme and collectible sneakers, I think that both of those categories had very robust markets that were actually very stabilized, but were kind of operating in the shadows or amongst collectors in Facebook groups or on secondary, websites, and we really just gave them an outlet. I think the NFT market is almost the opposite. There are a few outlets doing quite a large number of sales, but there isn't this kind of groundswell that's showing a very broad-based market. So I think we're gonna take it easy with the NFTs, but definitely keep a mindful eye and be ready to jump into that marketplace when we feel like it's created a broad enough consensus.
And again, if anybody really wants to acquire an NFT, Heritage does make them available through the sports department, through the NBA Top Shots.
Yes.
There's one in the auction that's upcoming in the next week. The sports department has launched a monthly showcase auctions in which there is a very, very, very desirable NFT to be found there. So it is something that we are very well aware of and are already participating in. Heritage was the first house to actually auction an NFT. So I want to get to the sneakers real quick because I'm fascinated by this. When I got here a year ago, right before the signature auction in March of last year, these Apple sneakers, there were just a few of them made. I think they were stalled out at a couple $100, and everyone thought, well, gosh, these aren't going to go for what we thought they were. And they closed at 87. They sold for $87.50, which was breathtaking to me. It was my introduction to the world of the auction. Look at how extraordinary and how wildly desirable these Apple sneakers were. And here we are a year later, and there's certainly no doubt but the fact that these shoes are in fact as coveted as we believe them to be, and as much as that this auction is in a couple of days, and they're already at 5,500, and people have been bidding on them throughout the day. In fact, they're already higher now than they were this morning.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think actually today alone we got something like, that pair that we're offering has gone up $2,000. I mean, it's a very interesting object. We've now offered the Apple sneakers 4 different times. Actually, our first Urban Art auction, we offered what we thought was one of the only pairs still in existence, which was a size 9 pair. And that pair we had a very high reserve on. Our consignor at the time thought he had the only pair left. And so we offered that pair, and that of course led to a few other people saying, oh, you know what, I have these as well. At the time we thought that we didn't know what they were made for as a prototype or some kind of, maybe gift for only a select few at Apple. We also had found out that Steve Jobs' sneaker size was size 9, so we thought maybe these were a personal pair, gifted to him. But we've since learned over the years that these were specifically made for the sales team. One year they were given out as kind of a perk to the sales team. There were somewhere between 200 and 300 pairs made, so definitely a few more than we had thought. But I will say that I think the number of surviving pairs, and especially in good condition like these, is certainly probably about the same. So I think there's really only been maybe a handful of surviving pairs, and probably only 2 or 3 of them are going to be in the condition of the ones that we have up now. These are actually in better condition and come with the original box, as you can see, which the last pair we auctioned off and sold for $8,000 did not have. And you can see they're in a little bit, I wouldn't say worse condition. I think they were just probably stored differently. Both this pair and the pair we're offering now are completely unworn. And as you can see, this pair also comes with the alternative set of laces. So that's another fun little, caveat there. And so, yeah, and we had also sold, Robert, it bears to mention that we had also sold this, I want to say 2 years ago, just before you joined at Heritage. We also sold the pair for about $13,750 or something like that, maybe $14,000. So, this is now our 4th time offering the Apple sneakers. Every time we offer them, people go crazy. They love them. I think there are Apple enthusiasts out there who love them. There are sneaker enthusiasts out there who love them. As you mentioned, we've had, over $1,000, maybe $2,000 in bidding on these alone this morning. Every time we offer them, there's articles somewhere. Last time we offered them, we had a big article showing off that Versace had actually kind of almost copied this design and put it out as a sneaker. The time before that, having a lot of articles having to do with the fact that it was just such a rare pair. And I think if you look at the list of the top 30 collectible Apple items, this always comes out as the first or second, hardest to find. And so really happy to be able to offer these again.
Well, as you point out, once upon a time, I'm sure you did not think that sneakers would be considered urban art, much less digital non-fungible tokens. So one of the great things about what you do is that it is an ever evolving marketplace of ideas and actual items.
Absolutely.
Hey, so before we wrap it up, there are some questions. Let me ask a question here. Another question about Banksy to Bennett. Bennett, we discussed Banksy for about 15 minutes at the top. You'll be able to watch this again on our Facebook page, or actually on the auction page for the Urban Art signature that takes place on Thursday. So we're not going to get back into the Banksy discussion. David asks, I don't think you have any swoon pieces in this auction. Swoon has to be the top female artist in the scene and seems to be left out of some conversations. Curious what you see in the secondary market for her work.
So, I think swoon is a lot of people's favorite. And I think a lot of us are waiting and wanting her market to kind of take off. I do think that, unfortunately, swoon, it hasn't happened, I think, for a number of reasons. I don't think she has a very good gallery behind her. And I think that that's a very big lack. I think she's also kind of taken a step back from the secondary marketplace and hasn't been as active and hasn't been as calculated in her role. As much as I do think the secondary marketplace doesn't necessarily have to do with the artist, I do think at the end of the day that, if the artist is cognizant of what's going on in their secondary market, then it's more likely that that marketplace will go up. They don't necessarily have to cater to it, but I think just being aware of what's going on and being able to use best judgment and best practices for future artistic production is very important. But I would say that, there's so many collectors out there who also feel like swoon is just ripe to explode. But again, without having important museum shows happening, without having gallery exhibitions, without doing collaborations, those are the kinds of things that I think galleries, when you have a gallery that represents you, that the gallery usually pushes. And for a lot of artists, if you don't have a gallery doing that, then you're doing that on your own. A great example would be Cause, who for many years did not have a gallery, but, opened his own retail store, did a lot of collaborations, put out a lot of products, published a lot of, his own toys and print editions, so short of doing that, I think that unfortunately we're going to have to wait a little bit longer for swoon's market to, to develop until there's really a groundswell and a consensus of her works.
Are there artists like swoon who you think are underappreciated or undervalued? I mean, here we have an Adrian Oliver pieces. We pulled a couple from previous sales, in addition to one that's in the one that's on Thursday. But I'm curious, kind of where you put some of the artists who you do believe to be undervalued and underappreciated, and maybe advise.
Well, I specifically chose Adrian Oliver because I do think that she's an artist to watch, and I do think she's ripe to take off. As opposed to swoon, who's been around for obviously a much longer time in the marketplace. Oliver is a newer, younger artist based in Barcelona, in Spain, and born and raised there in a family of artists. Originally started out as a photographer, moved into painting, and now, as you can see here, we've offered twice this Counting Stars edition. And this is the third time we're going to be offering it. So in the past, they've sold for, varying numbers. I think above $1,000 and above $2,000 respectively.
25 and 20 in March. Earlier it was 1625, and here we're up to 1,100 for this piece.
Yeah, and we're expecting this obviously to continue going. I think, look, in terms of some of the things I look out for in an artist, Oliver has those very recognizable. Very much imagery that when I see it, I know it's hers. Very much aesthetically pleasing. I think this kind of simplified, nearly abstract depiction of men and women talking about gender, talking about sexuality, and also that kind of removal of the eyes, that kind of removal of emotion, that removal of, I think what a lot of people will identify with, the soul of the person, right? I think removing that part, making that a part of her work that's very recognizable, and I think is kind of consistent throughout her work. And then, again, going back to what we were just talking about with Swoon, I think she's being responsive. She's seeing that people out there want her works. She's limiting the number of paintings she's making. She's making a more limited number of prints, and then the largest number of things being these, these polystone, sculpture editions. Those being the most accessible, and so she's doing things the right way, in my opinion. She does have a few different galleries around the world that are working with her work. And so she is doing a lot of exciting shows, and I think definitely an artist to look out for, definitely an artist that we're looking out for, and an artist that we're, excited to be able to offer now for the third time this particular edition, but we've offered other works of hers already. So I think we've offered maybe half a dozen works. So, really an artist I think to keep an eye out for.
One thing that certainly is the hallmark of urban art is the subversion of popular culture figures. Here's the Matt Gondek, and I'm fascinated by this. This sold in July of 2019. The Simpsons, the Nuclear Family. It's, I think, a 4-foot statue. Sold for about $7,000. We're offering it again, or a different one. This vinyl. It's a vinyl, painted cast vinyl. This is already at $6,250.
Yep.
I just assume that there is simply a profound attraction to artists who take things that are wildly familiar, like The Simpsons, and make it their own. And that's certainly a hallmark of urban art, as far as I've been concerned over the last year, and what I've learned about the genre.
Sure, and it's also, it's just also a signature of pop art, right? Warhol taking Marilyn, or taking Campbell's Soup or Mao. I mean, so many artists have obviously done that, and it's a very important part of the dialogue. I do think that for artists like Gondek, like Cause, even like Jerkface, who we'll look at very shortly, taking those and making those their own, but also tapping into our generation of collectors, looking at the things that we grew up with the images that are important to us, with the things that, kind of present a sense of nostalgia, or alternatively are things that we just identify and associate with. How many of us grew up watching The Simpsons and identifying with Bart and, laughing at his jokes and, kind of trying to replicate those with our friends, so that being a very important part of it. I think, especially for Matt's, been an artist that we've sold consistently. He's an artist that's really a self-starter, definitely a good friend. I've been on his podcast before, so just a really stand-up guy and a really sweet artist. Really nice guy that we love working with. And I should mention, we don't work with directly, but happy to be able to, to sell his works on a regular basis for our consigners and our collectors. And yeah, this is probably one of his most important works, I'd say. This was an edition of 100. So the kind of nuclear family in many senses of the word, playing off the fact that, Homer worked at a nuclear plant, working off the fact that they look like they just survived a nuclear explosion, and also the fact that they are actually a nuclear family. And so, this work specifically being probably one of Matt's most impressive sculptures at over 4 feet tall. So yeah, really happy to be able to offer this for the second time. And as you pointed out, already above what it last sold for. And then switching over to Jerkface, another artist. I think the reason I actually wanted to bring up this work, we sold this in 2018. So we were maybe just a little bit early on the Jerkface marketplace there. This work
That's a sentence I never expected to hear today, Leon, by the way. We were early on Jerkface.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this work sold for $4,500. I think if we were to offer this work today, it would be well over $20,000 or $25,000. The work that we're offering on Thursday, the bidding is at $6,500. We certainly expect that to go up from there. But this, kind of really playful image that you can see here with some of the characters that Jerkface has used in the past. It's also a really nice size canvas at 24 by 24 inches. And this is from 2015. So, that's certainly like an earlier work. And I do think for a lot of people, especially in the urban art field, they might hear about an artist for the first time, but not realize that many of these artists have been making these works for actually much longer period of time than they're aware of. And so, Jerkface being one of those artists who's also appropriating a lot of images and subverting them, rightfully so.
And as someone who used to watch this cartoon with my son, who actually had the little white hoodie here,
Yeah,
it's a piece that I find quite resonant for many reasons.
sure.
All right, there's a couple of questions I want to get to here before we let you go.
Mm-hmm.
I swear there's none more about the fungible, non-fungible tokens.
No problem.
JD asks, will you have more OG graffiti artists and upcoming auctions such as Lady Pink, Dondi, and Ramelzi?
Sure. Well, we've sold all those artists. We've sold Lady Pink, we've sold Dondi. Dondi being, I think, for me, one of the most satisfying artists to sell, but really hard to find a lot of great works. We've sold a lot of Futura, obviously, Stay High 149. We've also sold a lot of Blade, Crash, Days. You'll find a lot of those works in our monthly urban art auctions. Those are every month. They're usually the first Wednesday of the month. So those auctions tend to feature a lot of those works. Just by nature of the fact that it is hard to find substantial works by those artists, surprisingly, because so many of them were primarily street artists, they did produce many fewer canvases. But when we come across smaller sketches or things on subway maps, we typically offer those due to their value level in the monthly print sale. But whenever we do get a really fantastic standout work, a painting, then we do offer it in the signature sale. As you have up here, Richard Hambleton, who was kind of a street artist, but also really did produce a lot of paintings, actually. He's an artist that we've been able to sell very successfully many times.
Well, the reason I pulled him up is because somebody actually asks, how do you vet Richard Hambleton?
He's kind of a weird hybrid. I think Hambleton was certainly known for being in the street and being a street artist, but he did produce a lot of paintings as he gained notoriety later in his life, and unfortunately coupled with highly fueled drug addiction. He was being commissioned, unfortunately, usually taken advantage of by dealers or sometimes collectors, to make an increased number of works, especially later in his life. As a result of that, unfortunately, there are also a lot of fake Hambletons out there right now. So Hambleton is an artist that is really important, to make sure you're buying from a very reputable source, and also that there's been enough due diligence involved. But I will say for Hambleton, he is kind of one of those weird hybrid artists that's had a lot of market success. Has also had a variety of different galleries and dealers show him his work, both before his passing and after. He passed away in 2017, so not that long ago. I think for a lot of people, I actually showed Hambleton I had a gallery in Chelsea in my past life. And I showed Hambleton's work there in 2010, 2011, when he was still alive. And I think for those of us who were involved or knew him or knew the marketplace, having seen him around the Lower East Side in New York City for years and years and years, I think everyone just knew that whenever he passed, it would be a tough marketplace to maneuver and to navigate, and that has certainly rung true now.
Two quick questions, and I'll let you go, unless somebody else pops in with one. Dieter is a European contemporary collector in Canada who's sold through Heritage. Wondering if European contemporary is a part of our sales, or certainly something that you handle and are interested in.
Sure. European contemporary, for the most part, will sell in our modern and contemporary art auctions. Those auctions are typically in May and November every year. That's the kind of thing, though, that I'm always happy for anyone who has any questions, wants to know if we sell something, wants to know if we sell a very specific artist. Always happy for you to reach out to me. My email is really easy. It's just leonb@ha.com. So it's Leon and then B, like my last name, Ben Ramon, @ha.com. You can always feel free to send me an email if you have any questions. You want to consign something, always happy to take a look. I'd say I spend most of my day replying to collectors, who are trying to understand if the artist that they own is something that we sell. You can also always look on our website and search for that artist and see if it's an artist we've sold in the past. But I will say for a category, especially like urban art, where sometimes we're offering artists for the first time or offering them at auction for the first time. They've never sold at auction before. That isn't always necessarily the best way to find out if it's a work that we would sell or would not sell. So you're always welcome to email me. But yeah, European contemporary art, I'd say specifically, we'll usually sell in our modern contemporary art sales. Although, of course, there's always the caveat that, European contemporary street artists will sell in the urban art sale. European contemporary artists might also sell in our prints and multiple sales. So depending on the artwork, depending on the artist. And if you're looking to buy those works, always the best thing to do is if you set up your account at Heritage, you can always set up a my want list. So you can put in a very specific search term, or you can put in an artist name, and you'll get an email notifying you whenever we're offering that artist at auction.
So my last question for you comes from Van, who wants to know simply, what is your view on Stick? STIK for those who
Yeah, Stick is a British street artist, an artist that we have sold actually in the past. We sold a canvas of his, I want to say 2 years ago, for nearly $90,000. It seemed like a decent price at the time. I think now that same canvas would sell for 2 or 3 times that amount. His market is obviously very explosive. What you're looking at here is some of his upcoming prints. So we sell his prints on a very regular basis. And you can see one right there. I think this is going to be in our May auction, if my memory serves me correctly, or it might be
that's
April.
That's in the April urban
April sale. So that's coming right up. I'd say Stick is definitely one to watch. I like the fact that his works are very recognizable. I like the visual aspect of them. I think they're very kind of pleasing to look at, and people really love them. That's the work we sold there, $68,000. That was a few years back. I certainly think that work would sell for a whole lot more now. Some collaboration works that he's did with LA2, an LA-based artist. So yeah, as you can see, we've sold a lot of Stick in the past. Definitely an artist. I think that's one to watch. I don't think that the dust has settled yet for Stick the way it has for, let's say, Banksy, where I think it's universally accepted and agreed upon that Banksy will continue to be an important artist in the field. I do think that Stick certainly has a voice and is certainly saying some very interesting things. I think the question is where he'll end up. So I think a lot of us keeping a watchful eye, rightfully so, and watching his prices certainly explode and take off, primarily in a lot of the UK auctions. We're seeing a lot of his print editions, his sculptures go for just crazy prices.
Leon, I know I said that was the last question, but this will be the last question as we hit the hour mark here. And I do appreciate everyone sticking around for this, and Leon, you most of all. Someone asks here in the questions, your thoughts now on Cleon Peterson.
I love Cleon Peterson. I've always loved Cleon Peterson. I think his aesthetic is very unique. I think the ideas that he's talking about are very of the moment, very contemporary. For a lot of people who know Cleon, he kind of got his training wheels in various artist studios, but most notably with Shepard Fairey. So really kind of, as you can see here, that certain graphic sensibility, but I'd say, still very much different and varied from Shepard. I will say for Cleon fans out there, we happen to have brought in a fantastic Cleon consignment with some of his best work. So we'll be offering painting, sculpture, works on paper, and prints. Those should be populating soon. I don't think that they're up on the website just yet.
They are not.
Many of those things will be offered in July, actually, in our July Signature Urban, which is our next Signature Urban sale after this one. That sale will have some really standout works. But I think Cleon is an artist who's he's kind of taken off, but I think he's got way more runway. I think there's no doubt that his market could be huge. And I do think that he's got the right people behind him. He's working with the right people. And so, I think we expect to see very big things from Cleon in the future. I do think he's lacking probably that big museum or that big gallery show, but I have no doubt that he'll get there in the near future.
Well, I know what you think of Cleon, and I hope everyone watching knows what I think of Leon. Leon, thank you very much for doing this, sir. It's been a great pleasure.
My pleasure.
If
Thank
anybody
you.
has a question for you, Leon, what is the best way? Go ahead and give your email address one more time.
Absolutely. Anytime over email. My email is just Leon, Leon, and then my last initial, which is B at ha.com. So leonb at ha.com. Very
and
easy.
I will say, so the Hebrew Brantley Blue Flyboy has gone up $2,000 in the course of our discussion here, Leon. So well done.
Always happy to hear that. Expecting to see much more.
But again, if anyone is buying this for me, I will take it at any price. So I want to thank you in advance. This is one of my favorite pieces that I've seen during my year at Heritage Auctions. And Leon is one of my favorite people that I've gotten to spend time with here. So thank you for doing this, sir. I look forward to doing it again. I'm actually hosting another one of these state of the market commentaries and previews tomorrow at noon as we discuss the Paramount collection with Chris Bierenbach and Sam Spiegel as we discuss World and Ancient Coins, which is the opposite, I believe, of the contemporary urban art market. Leon, thanks. And thank you, everybody, for watching and sticking around and for such excellent questions. We'll do this again. See you soon, and good luck on Thursday.